Virtually every community in the United States has come to the realization that they can indeed do things to direct their economic future. And they have begun economic development programs. Many of them were started 50 years ago in many of the northern states. And they focus upon exactly what I've been talking about, these enterprises that sell their goods or services outside the area, because they fully understand that those are the companies that import money to the area, which is then spread out among the entire economy, and everybody benefits from it, and they are the engines. Since they sell their stuff outside the area, and I repeat this, they don't have to be in any community. They need to be there near their marketplace, which might be the eastern United States or the state of Georgia, but they can actually be located anywhere, and where they are located influences to a large part their costs of production, which is why I went through that whole series of things that I explained to you earlier, 1 through 4, affect cost of production, whether they're producing a service or a product. And communities are learning more and more that if they are able to keep those costs low, then the company will not only stay there, but also expand. I alluded to earlier when I did my projections about the future of the U.S. economy. Let me just explain a couple of things to you about that economy. In 2003, we imported roughly $1.4 trillion worth of stuff into this country from other nations. 10 years later, it was $2.4 trillion. We added $1 trillion of imports over a 10-year period. And these are not tennis shoes and T-shirts. These are pharmaceuticals and high-value, high-cost products being produced by high-cost labor. Not necessarily coming out of China, but from the rest of the world. That trend drove out it cost the United States a large number of quality manufacturing jobs in a lot of the industrial sectors that are located in your county. When we look at your job loss, many of those in manufacturing were in those sectors where those imports were created. I also know communities in the United States that have been very successful the last 6 or 7 or 8 years at recruiting advanced manufacturing companies to their communities. The very ones that had been importing or exporting to the United States products that we were importing. How could they do it? It's because they got the cost of production low enough in that community that that company could compete on an international basis. Cost of production. And one of those ways they did that was giving advanced manufacturing companies free land, fully improved, train their workers, and give them tax abatement for 10 years. And as a result, some of these communities have had billions of dollars of capital investment. Thousands of high-wage jobs have been created during a national recession. So it not only can be done, but it's a lesson on what should and could be done. So here we are facing, and I showed you the charts, I'm going to show you some more, that your primary employers are in danger. Don't underestimate this problem. It is a real problem, but a community can do things to prevent it from happening. So we go through those first 4 things. Now, what is the single most important issue relative to causing economic growth? It is the availability of improved, approved industrial real estate. There is nothing more important than this. And when I say improved, that means all the infrastructure is there. It is site ready. Approved means all the zoning and planning issues have been resolved. Essentially, you can get a building permit for a 300,000 square foot factory in 90 days, because that's what all the other communities are doing. That's your competition. So, economic development is ultimately a real estate transaction. the single most important issue relative to economic development and the site selection process is having an actual site. If you do not have, as a result of build-out, sites, then your existing companies cannot expand in your county and new companies cannot come here. As a result, over a period of time, existing facilities will become unusable by these companies and they will have to leave the area. Consequently, the economy will decline. By the way, this guy here is an attempt by an economist to be a cartoonist. He's a cute guy, isn't he? Here's your metropolitan area. I mentioned earlier that Pinellas County is part of a metro, and the reason why you are defined metropolitan areas is that there's cross-pollination. People go from here to there, and they go from Pasco to here and up and down. Even some people who live in Hernando work here. A handful of people who live in Pinellas actually work clear all the way up in Hernando. But there's going around and around. It is a defined metropolitan area. Now, what I was asked to do by the county and the planning department was to begin to evaluate this implication and impact of reaching physical build-out. They asked me to compare, again, your economy to several other areas, but this time I chose, instead of Palm Beach County, I added Milwaukee County, Wisconsin. Because this whole issue now that I'm going to talk about is how real estate affects economies. And there is a principle. Economic growth will follow the path of least resistance. Not necessarily people growth, but economic growth will follow the path of least resistance. So we're going to look at 4 counties. Wake County, which is Raleigh, Mecklenburg, which is North Carolina, Charlotte, Milwaukee County, and Denver County. Now, this is your square miles. You're at 273. Wake County is a bigger county, 835. Mecklenburg's 523 square miles. Milwaukee County is just a little bit smaller than your county, and Denver County is about half the size. But look at these populations. They're all pretty much the same until we get to Denver County. Now, there's 2 different things here. This is why I color-coded these. Wake and Charlotte, Mecklenburg, are new economies. They are greenfield economies. And when I say new economies, they began their economic growth principally after World War II. These are old economies. And when I say old, some of them go back to the founding of our country, but these 2 were pretty much began to be developed in the mid-1800s. And we have a lot of old economies out there. These old economies are built out. The new economies are in greenfield areas. So let's take a look at some of the things that have been happening. With Raleigh, we have Wake County, which is a metropolitan area. The Raleigh, North Carolina MSA has 2 adjoining counties. Mecklenburg, which is the Charlotte, Concord, Gastonia, and it also leaks into South Carolina. Here's the principal county. These are the outlying counties. In the old economies, we have Milwaukee County, bordered by Lake Michigan, with 3 outlying counties. And here's the Denver metropolitan area, and here's Denver, which is a city county, geographically about half the size. This looks like a huge area, but if you've been out there, you know that this is all mountains right in here, and there's really not much going on. But these are the geographic areas. So let's look at the growth patterns of each of these areas to see the dynamic that has been occurring. And I believe this is 1972. Yes, it is. All right, so we're in 1972, and we're going to go through 2012. 2012, by the way, is the last year that full quality data sets are available for every county in America. They were actually released in May of this year, which is why a lot of my stuff ends in 2012. Complete comprehensive data is available. So when we look at Wake Raleigh, and the principal county is in orange, and these are the outlying counties. This is the population growth. And you can see that there's been rapid growth in population in Raleigh. The outlying areas sort of sat there for a while, and they began to take off as far as people. Virtually all the jobs were created in Wake County, a greenfield county with plenty of room to grow and expand, and some of the jobs occurred here. Now, the reason why they're linked is that these two blue counties became dependent upon Wake County for jobs. There's an awful lot of people commuting from blue to brown here, and this is why they're economically linked. But unrestricted growth in both jobs and people, room to grow. Here's Charlotte, a whole bunch of counties in the Charlotte MSA. Here's Mecklenburg County, and these are all, like there's the 12 counties in total, maybe 10. Blue are the outlying counties. Here's the central county. Both grew in population pretty well for the last 30 years. But look at the dynamic occurred here. This is Mecklenburg. This isn't jobs. Here, the number of jobs past outlying area, and the job growth principally has been here. This has been an economic magnet for the area, and this county is one of the most prosperous in the nation because it's a source of employment and wealth generation for this whole area in here. That's what happens when you have greenfield new economies. Economic growth follows the path of least resistance. And resistance can be caused by political boundaries, by the way. There's no doubt about that. So let's look at Milwaukee County. And this county has 3 adjacent counties. And this is typical dynamic of a build-out county. That, in fact, this is population. Milwaukee County probably built out 1970s, maybe 1975 for practical purposes. Began the decline in population, continued to decline, and for the last 30 years has been on population decline. The outlying areas, the blue areas, however, is where the economic growth occurred. That population began to grow, kept growing, until we began, that's jobs. But you can see the population grew. In jobs, there has been virtually no job growth in Milwaukee County, which is about the same size as Pinellas County, for about 40 years. In fact, back in this area here, they actually had more people working back in the 60s than they do in 2014. There we go. The job growth in the outlying areas was consistent and robust because there was land for it to occur. Build-out counties lose population and have virtually no job growth. So, Denver. And this is one of a greater lesson on what happens at build-out. Denver County is about half the size of you physically. So here's Denver County population. And we have to go back here, and the population basically hasn't really increased. It began to increase about this point, and it actually has added about 50,000 people over the last 10 years. In the outlying areas, population grew about 1 million in these counties here. In job growth, there were more people working in Denver City County back in 1972 than in the outlying areas. But look at this massive job growth in the outlying areas. And Denver County dipped, came back, dipped, and came back. Now, the Milwaukee County example is actually, they're doing better than a vast majority of the build-out areas. Even though we saw that they didn't grow much in population, had a little bit of a decline, most built-out areas have a pretty high decline of both jobs and people. And the reason why is that the employers have to leave, some of the people working there have to leave, there's nobody there to buy the house that they're leaving, and the areas begin to hollow out. A little bit of blight starts, and blight is like cancer. It spreads. And more over a period of time it occurs. So most of the built-out areas have been on economic decline. I chose Milwaukee because it is relatively successful, and they have been doing redevelopment. Now we get to Denver. Interesting dynamic. We have this massive growth of people and a massive number of jobs outside the boundary of the city. We didn't have significant decline, and actually in the last several years in employment, they've actually increased employment. A couple of things happened there. In the very early 1990s, Lowry Air Force Base closed. about 1,800 acres, was not a huge parcel of land. It's within the city of Denver. A lot of it was polluted, but they did redevelop it. It took some time. They did not put very much land into employment centers at all, and a lot of it was the nature of the land. But they did roughly build some 5,000 houses there. So that was a place where I think about 15,000 people then helped cause some of the population increase. In roughly 1994, 95, Stapleton Airport closed, and the new airport in Denver opened. That opened up 4,700 acres of prime real estate. Now, if I'd been God, I would have reserved those 4,700 acres just for primary employers. But I'm not God, and I wasn't even there at the time to advise them. But they have done an amazing job, amazing to some degree, because the market was there for this, of redevelopment of this 4,700 acres. They committed roughly a third, a little bit more than a third of it to residential, a third of it to retail commercial, and a third of it for primary employer type business enterprises. Today, they can offer sites as large as 70 acres to a campus-style type primary employer. They have built roughly 1.1 million square feet of R&D type space for primary employers. They've had about 15, I'm trying to speak from memory on it, roughly 15,000 housing units have been built, more than a couple million square feet of retail. And the reason why I feel, why did they do that? I suspect it's the same reason why you don't have a whole bunch of industrial land available in your county. There isn't any money in it. I suspect that the airport authority needed cash to help pay for the new airport from sale of parcels there. Well, you can't wait 30 years on 4,700 acres hoping a primary employer is going to come in. And so they went to the marketplace, which is what residential and retail. And they sold a lot of product. And they've just now converted some more industrial property to residential to get cash. I don't know where all the cash goes. They've got a good private developer managing this. But it's a situation where the market demand is there for housing. It's there for retail. So they're redeveloping this. But where did the money come from? Where did the marketplace come from for this redevelopment? Because what Denver also did, they went vertical. Been downtown Denver, they've got vertical housing. They've got a lot of good stuff going on. They've redeveloped a lot of old strip centers into quality strip centers. They've done housing. The population did not decline. It went up. The economy grew. The number of jobs went up in this geographically restricted area. The marketplace were these other counties. That's where 1 million people live and about 400,000 jobs created. That's where the wealth is to provide the money for the people who want to actually go to redevelopment areas. I bring this up because it wasn't, the marketplace never would have been there for Denver's redevelopment if the entire region's wealth wasn't so great. Never would have happened. People couldn't afford to buy these redevelopment products. And so this redevelopment was pushed by the overall economy. So now we go to your region, the metropolitan area. Now, once again, the brown line is Pinellas. I added Hillsborough in the green line, and the blue line is the combo of Pasco and Hernando. Go back to 1972. There were more, the population was greater in Pinellas County than in Hillsborough. Both are growing and reach about this point, 1990. Population growth began to slow in Pinellas County, began to flatline, and hasn't grown since roughly 1998. Meanwhile, Hillsborough takes off, and the outlying Hernando and Pasco keep growing in population. I think at that point, roughly 1995, 96, 97, the area likely reached physical build-out for residential. Because it's a great place to live. Why would people stop moving here? while they're continuing to go to Hillsborough and continuing to go to the outlying areas. It's because of the availability of land to construct new homes. So we look at jobs. Back in 1972, there's just about as many people working in Pinellas County as in Hillsborough. And Hillsborough takes off and go through the 90s, and my goodness, look at this. Whoop, began to slow, takes off again, and begins to flatline and decline. Meanwhile, Hillsborough takes off. They did decline because of the recession, too. They lost a bunch of manufacturing jobs, and it's taken off again. Slow but steady job growth in the outlying areas. I suspect, when I did my study in 2001, I was projecting that the area would reach physical build-out for industrial purposes by 2006 or 2007, 2008. I suspect the county was already at it in 2001 because this growth in the availability of property for your primary employers began to slow, and it has stalled and stopped right now. There's been growth here in Pasco. That also flatlined pretty much in Hernando. By the way, Hillsborough County, it isn't at this point, but they will soon reach build-out relative to land available for primary employers. I've not done a complete analysis of their land availability. It's a big county geographically, but a lot of it can't be used. And so we have a situation that we're going to have to talk about here relative to the three counties. Over this period of time, gain, loss of employment, over that last 10-year period, Pinellas County lost 20,000 jobs and lost 3,700 people. Hillsborough gained 47,000 jobs and 222,000. The balance of the metro gained 41,000 and 136,000. This looks an awful lot like the Milwaukee metro. When we compare it to the other areas, and this is our population growth, once again, Pinellas ranked 346th, Milwaukee County 323, Denver grew in population at the 114th fastest rate. The greenfield areas, obviously fast in population, and we go back to jobs, and the reason I got this up here again, we lost jobs, so did Milwaukee County. We're looking an awful lot like Milwaukee County. Denver grew in jobs, but not at a great rate. The greenfield areas grew rapidly. Economic growth follows the path of least resistance. So in summary, built-out areas need to redevelop. This is what's occurring in Denver County. They got some land for some primary employers, they got some land for some housing, and they're tearing down and building up. Now that is not self-generated in that county because a lot of that wealth is coming from the surrounding areas. So let's go back to our goal. These are the lines I showed you before about that we just had up for Hernando, and I wanted to show you the results of those scenarios that I showed you before on this chart. This is employment. This is Hillsborough, Pinellas, and these are the four lines. This is the projections. This is the minimum effort, this is the good effort, and this is the strong effort. You can see even with strong effort, there isn't going to be any rapid growth rate. And it's not really, if you had 5,000 acres available of approved industrial real estate, you could do better than strong effort, but that isn't going to happen. It just isn't available. So, if we reach the goals, well, that's, as Dr. Moore talks about, are we intense or are we dense? Or are we, are we urban or suburban? This is the number of jobs per square mile. In 2002, you had 2,046 jobs per square mile. By 2012, it dropped to 1973. My projections show that you will decline to 1873 in your jobs per square mile. You achieve minimum effort is 21, your good effort is only 22, and a strong effort, if you do all those primary jobs I'm talking about, you get 2,300 jobs per acre. That's still fewer than Milwaukee County, and almost 1,000 fewer than Denver County at the present time. And this is by 2030. So you're never going to become ultra dense, but we still have to make opportunities. So, first recommendation. Pinellas County needs to accept the fact that Pinellas County is part of a regional economy. Since there will be limitations on the amount of economic growth which can physically occur within the boundaries of your county, economic growth must occur in the adjacent counties. And that's what happened for Denver. And that's why I kept stressing that. The reason they were able to do this redevelopment is because the surrounding counties had done so well. Now, this doesn't mean that when Mike Mydell gets a client call, and says he doesn't pick up the phone and call his counterpart in Pasco or Hillsborough and hands that client off. No. But you come to the realization that you're even with my recommendation for land to redevelop, you don't have a military base that's going to close. You don't have these big things, at a major airport that's going to close. So you're not going to have these 4,000 and 5,000 acre clunks of land thrown at you that you could redevelop for primary purposes. You're going to have to pick and choose what you're going to redevelop. So when your companies need to grow and expand and they can't do it here, you need to make every effort they stay in the region. Because once a company makes a decision to move, they can go anywhere. They can go to Atlanta, Albuquerque, Las Vegas. Once they pick up and move, it isn't a big deal to move out of the area or out of the state. And there are thousands of communities that love to have them do that. And so as a region, I know you're marketing as a region with the Tampa Bay Partnership, and this is good. But you have to be cooperative and understand that if they pick up and move, let them land in either Hillsborough, Pasco, or Hernando County. I mentioned earlier that Hillsborough is starting to reach build-out. So it could likely be, over the next 5, 10, 15 years, Pasco County will be the catcher's mitt for industry to be able to provide the facilities, the lands, so that these companies can stay in the area. This is vital. And then if they stay in the area, you might have some of your folks crossing the causeway to work, but they're going to still be here. They won't have to sell their houses and cause density to be blighted areas to occur. And that's exactly what happened in Denver. So that is a recommendation you need to consider. And I don't have any specific programs because I know you're doing some of this stuff already, but you are part of a regional economy. Next, remember Pinellas by Design? In 2005, that document, that plan that we spent roughly 18 months trying to create recommended 4,000 acres within your county for redevelopment for industrial purposes. And let me talk about that word industrial. This means, no, is this being tape recorded? You got to cut this out. Industrial means chemical plants that spew orange smoke into the area, and it falls upon everybody's house, and the houses turn orange, and then they turn brown, and then they burn up. I was told that in a speech out in California one time. That's what industrial means. Industrial is an economic term. It talks about activity, wealth-generating activity. That's what industry is. And so we talk about industry, we're talking about our primary employers. Industrial land. It can be for a corporate headquarters, which can be vertical. It can be a low-rise, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7-story campus-type complex for research and even financial headquarters. And horizontal, which is typically manufacturing, which is what? The biggest industry in this county. So industry is a place for primary employers to locate. So they identify some 4,000 acres that could be used for redevelopment. And this is the major recommendation. And this is the recommendation we're going to have some time to talk about. To meet the real estate needs, to build the economy, the community needs to acquire, own, and redevelop at least 500 acres of industrial property in strategic locations, not where the community wants them to go, but where the companies want to go over the next 10 years. And reserve this property for primary employers. Now, this idea of government-owned or community-owned industrial parks or employment centers is a relatively new concept for the state of Florida. Florida grew after the interstate highway was developed and the utility companies could produce enough electricity for air conditioning. And as the economic growth was around tourism and retirement, because that was easy. It was just easy. Just build these subdivisions and build houses, and communities were up around them. Industry, manufacturing was not a focus of the state of Florida. However, in virtually every county in the state of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, there are county-owned industrial parks that the government and the community have jointly developed. Many of these were started 50 years ago. I know communities that have filled 3 of them by now. They are specifically looked upon as a future economic engine for the community. These folks understand the primary employers generate wealth. These industrial areas are reserved solely for primary businesses. They're not sold to the local retailer or the local home builder, ever. They are reserved. Some of them sit for a long time. Some of them are developed right away. And some of them basically are consumed. One of my client communities, Columbus, Mississippi, Lowndes County, Mississippi. How many have been to Columbus? Air Force Base there. Is that why you were there, for the Air Force Base? It used to be the single biggest economic contributor. That's right, Mike was there. In fact, you go back 30 years, the Columbus Air Force Base was the biggest, had the greatest economic impact. It isn't today. It's second. But about 12 or 13 years ago, this county of 60,000 people in the state of Mississippi was looking to try to attract the automobile industry. That's about 14 years ago. And so the people of this community said, well, we want to do this. And so they acquired 1,500 acres and fully developed it. Sewer, water, everything is what's called a mega site, hoping that this auto plant would then go there. Well, it didn't. So now they're sitting with 1,500 acres they shelled out a bunch of cash for, fully developed, and nobody's sitting there, nobody using it. 2 or 3 years went by, nothing happened. Were they frustrated? No. They added 1,500 more acres, made it a 3,000-acre industrial park owned by the community, fully developed. At that time, a steel company came in, Severstal Steel, took down 1,000 acres, put $2.5 billion facility in there. Has about 2,000 high-wage jobs as a result of it. They kept adding land. They're up to 7,500 acres right now of a community-owned industrial park, 400 megawatt service going to it, rail everything. They've had now almost $3.5 billion of capital investment from advanced manufacturing companies, diesel engines, aircraft, helicopters going into this area. Why? You can begin building next week. You get the land free. But they fully understood this investment, and it sat for years, and nothing ever happened. They knew it would someday because they had the product available. So we get into this, that it is not unusual for the community and the counties to own these employment centers outside of Florida. It is somewhat unusual within the state because there's no history for it here. So of this thing, if your county doesn't have one of these right now, you need to create a legal entity, and the IDA might be the one to do it, the Industrial Development Authority, that has the ability to borrow and expend money for the purposes of buying, redeveloping, and then selling this real estate reserved for primary employers. The land will be exclusively held for the sole use by primary employers, and not for home building, not for retail, not for that, and not be available for any other purpose. The county and the municipalities, principally the non-beachfront, this really, it helps them, but it's justified they can be left out of this project, should pool their financial resources to pay for this. The entity will acquire title to the property, cause it to be developed, and offer it to primary employers at a price determined by the economic impact of the company. Basically, they can give the land away free if you want to, because the economic impact might be so overwhelmingly good. The construction of speculative buildings can be done on this property, as is done in many other communities, that the community builds speculative buildings. And by the way, they will sit empty on average for 3 years. Probably not in this county, though. I suspect a speculative building will go quicker. An initial investment of approximately $50 million, well, over the next 10 years, the community needs to expect to expend between $200 and $300 million to pay for this. The community being county government, all your muni governments, pooling their resources to do this, and you will likely need to have a $50 million front-end load to finance this project and anticipate $20 to $30 million contribution toward it. And that contribution toward this will probably never end. That you will have to constantly be able to provide these sites for these wealth-generating companies. Now, some have suggested, not here, not in this room, but other places I go, that suggesting that the community and our government create these parks is competing with the private sector. Guess what? You're not, because the private sector has absolutely no interest in doing this. I was in, many years ago, helping to develop a 500-acre industrial park in Palm Beach County. The partnership that bought it had bought it from a high-tech company who, in their minds, had designed the finest high-technology corporate campus in the United States at the time, the land layout. We had a golf course in the middle of this industrial park. We had roughly 200 sellable acres of industrial property. The idea was for primary employers. Concurrent with that, 2 other industrial parks were created in the state of, in Palm Beach County, about equal size. All 3 of us went into foreclosure. The marketplace wasn't there. We could not wait for a corporate headquarters to come out of New York to buy some land and build a building. The next owners of all these parks virtually filled them all through residential because that's where the marketplace was, and they had to get their cash out of it. Private developers cannot wait 3, 4, 5, 10 years for a buyer to come along, and they won't. And this is out of the Pinellas by Design booklet. This shows this ratio of economic impact to the value of real estate. With industrial here, that the highest economic impact is industrial, primary employers. The highest value for real estate, which is at this point, is a retail corner. The pressure for the owners, and I don't blame them, this is all business. You want to get the best price for your money. The last thing they want to develop is an industrial. You don't get any money out of it. The first thing you want to do is retail, then residential, then office, general purpose office. Plus the extraordinary cost of redevelopment. That if you go into this from a private sector position and you spot 20 acres of dirt that's in a location that a primary employer might want to go, you buy the land for the price that the guy thinks you ought to be getting for it, you take the bulldozers to it, now you have the cost of purchase for the existing buildings, it's all cleaned up, your redevelopment, and that interest clock is ticking. No one's going to wait for a primary employer who's coming into your town who will rarely pay market for the property because they don't have to. They can get a free site in Port St. Lucie. This land must be discounted to them. But it all makes sense why you should. Remember this bucket? Here's the bucket. These transactions, this wealth being mixed and churned, going back and forth. This impact can be measured. It's called, you've heard about the ripple effect or the multiplier effect. I use M-Plan algorithms. You buy the data and you buy the this from M-Plan. They're the standard in the industry. I purchased Pinellas County's multipliers and it goes down to the 6-digit NAICS code as far as the impact that your industrial sectors have, and then it'll multiply this stuff. And what I did, I tried to measure the economic impact of the various primary employers in your county. And impact is you start with, say, 10 jobs, and as a result of that employer, another 20 jobs could be created, and it creates so much in income and so much in sales tax and so much. This is the impact upon the economy. I put a working week into this for you folks. And what I did, I went down to 23 industrial subsectors just in manufacturing because they have different impact multipliers. And so what I want to show you, and I'm breaking Bill Fruth's rule on PowerPoint, never show anything greater or smaller than 24-point type. But what this is a quick summary of the economic impact of these 7 industrial sectors, which are primary in nature. Now, once again, these are not all the workers in these sectors. They're the ones determined to be working for a company that sells their goods or services outside the area. In 2014, I estimated 64,850 of these jobs are out there among these sectors. In manufacturing, roughly 29,000, of which I looked at 23 different subsectors, such as pharmaceutical manufacturing, the manufacturing of navigational equipment. That's you get down to the 5-digit sector, and ran them each. Over that time, this is the summary of that. Those 29,000 jobs caused the formation of 78,000 jobs. This is the impact, these columns right here. It generates $4.6 billion of payrolls in the county and $2.9 billion in taxable retail sales. Your corporate headquarters are the second biggest of the primary employers. Roughly 11,000 jobs caused the formation of 27,000, payrolls of $2.1 billion a year, and $959 billion in taxable retail sales. Wholesale, we go down the line all the way through these non-store retailers. Now, retailing typically is not primary, but when you got a TV show, those sales are occurring all around the world. And so this is money flowing into your economy. And so this is the overall economic impact of the primary employers. They cause 156,000 jobs to be formed, $9 billion a year in payrolls, and taxable retail sales of $7 billion a year. So what if we reach the goal? By the way, you lose 10,000 jobs, put minus signs in front of that. And that's what's been occurring recently. So if we reach the goal, this is the economic impact of reaching the goal. First, we have to save the companies that we have. No loss anymore of primary jobs. The minimum effort would cause another 39,000 jobs to be formed, $2.3 billion in payrolls, and taxable retail sales of $1.8 billion. If you do the strong effort, and you can, by the way, you can do this strong effort. You did better than this in the 1990s. You have all the assets. You have all this stuff going for you. All you need is some dirt. Mike, what if you had 10 50-acre parcels? Oh, he'd be strutting into these meetings. I got land. The strong effort, 32,000 jobs, new primary jobs. It will cause another 78,000, $4.7 billion in payrolls. So, communities need to create industrial areas to prevent their economy from declining and to cause economic growth. I'm asking you to at least commit $30 million a year toward a multi-billion-dollar economic impact. You're already doing that. You are spending roughly $30 million a year to promote tourism, which is, tourism's a real sexy industry. But we're doing it now. Now, this money, about $20 million of it goes to promoting the area, about $10 million of it goes to beach restoration and for paying bonds on stadiums. But it's all coming from the tourist tax, the 5% tax on hotels. But let's take a look at the economic impact of tourism with their $30 million being spent toward that. And that money can't be used for anything else. I mean, it's dedicated to tourism. You can't, unless the Florida legislature changes that, that's where it goes. So what I did, and once again, unfortunately, this is small type, but I want to do an economic impact of what tourism is on the community to measure it against the other primary employers. There are two places where a lot of cash from tourists go initially, into the hotels and into the restaurants. This is all the people who work in all the restaurants in the county, roughly 34,000. The impact is 44,000 jobs. You know, it's that ratio that's significantly less than any of the others. The total payroll impact of all the restaurants in the county is $1.2 billion, and taxable retail sales of 1.4. There are roughly 7,700 people who work in the hotels. The economic spin-off or multiplier is 12,000 jobs, payrolls of only 440 million, and taxable retail sales of $807 billion. So we combine them both together. The two major areas where they throw in their money, 41,000 jobs. But let's get down to the tourism portion. Now, not everyone's at a hotel is a tourist. I mean, I'm staying at the La Quinta over here, and guess what? The lady riding up the elevator with me was not a tourist. She had rented a room there because her house in this county had mold, and they have to stay a month at the La Quinta. So they're not a tourist. Typically, in most Florida counties, 65% of all hotel sales are to commercial travelers. This is one of the reasons why nationally, about 90% of all the new hotel product built was directed toward commercial travelers in the last 10 years. So here we are, and so what is the estimate? And I'm here in hotel tourism. What I did, I was generous. I suggested that 365 days a year, if you total up that, 65% of all hotel sales are tourists. That's probably a little high, because when we look at the ratio of jobs to employment and what can be accounted for, the number of people employed in hotels in Pinellas County is below the Florida average. And so, but we're going to go with 65 to be generous. Now, then we go to restaurants. There are 930,000 people who live in this county. I suspect you go out to eat every now and then. So we have to try to get an idea about how many people who go to a restaurant 365 days of the year are out-of-town tourists. Given the fact that the number of people employed in restaurants and eating and drinking places is normally higher than normal because of retirement age population, that we're going to credit roughly 15% of all restaurant sales during the course of an entire year attributed to tourism. So we make the adjustments and we get to the, and then I added another 50% of everything just to account for other spending by the tourists for charter boats and buying something at Walmart or whatever they're going to do. So we came up with roughly 15,000 jobs directly attributed to tourists. It caused another 21,000, a total of $700 million in payrolls, total impact 1.1 billion. And then we compare this to manufacturing and to corporate headquarters alone. That corporate headquarters is actually almost 2.5 times the impact tourism has on your local economy, and manufacturing by payrolls is well into almost 5 times the economic impact of tourism on the economy. So where I bring this up, because I want to put this investment I'm asking you to make in proportion to benefit. That if you invest $20 to $30 million a year and solve this problem, you will get 20-fold back on your money every year thereafter. So, in conclusion, 13 years ago, I did a study for you folks that showed that when you reach physical build-out, your economy will decline. 12 years ago, I did an economic goal study for you that projected that you would decline, but showed that if you could create these jobs, these primary jobs, you would have economic growth. 10 years ago, we did the Design by Pinellas, or Pinellas by Design. 18 months of labor, community participation, which basically said we have to redevelop 4,000 acres of industrial property if we're going to survive as a community. That was in 2005, 10 years ago. Folks, today, if a company wanted to come to this community, or if you had an existing company that needed 40 acres upon which to build a campus-style environment and hire 2,600 people and be paid $85,000 a year, they can't come here. And they can't stay here because you don't have a place for them to go. And that's the reality of it. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me again, and we are going to have sufficient time here, I think, for a series of questions.